The music industry's biggest lie was told so often that even Elvis Presley began to believe it himself. For decades, critics, biographers, and even his own record label perpetuated the myth that the king of rock and roll was nothing more than a talented interpreter, a gifted performer who could bring other people's songs to life but couldn't write his own. They were wrong. Completely, categorically, devastatingly wrong. What they didn't want you to know was that Elvis Aaron Presley was secretly one of the most prolific songwriters of his generation, creating dozens of compositions that would become classics, writing lyrics that would touch millions of souls, and crafting melodies that would define the sound of American popular music. But here's the shocking part. His name appears on almost none of them. This is the story of how the music industry's most powerful men systematically erased Elvis's creative contributions, how they turned one of America's greatest songwriters into a voiceless performer, and how they nearly succeeded in burying the truth forever. Until now. The conspiracy began before Elvis had even recorded his first song. In 1954, when a nervous 19-year-old walked into Sun Records to make a recording for his mother, he brought with him a collection of handwritten lyrics and melodies that would later become some of the most iconic songs in popular music history. Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, recognized Elvis's performing talent immediately. What he also recognized, but never publicly acknowledged, was the young man's extraordinary ability to craft original music that captured the raw emotion and revolutionary spirit that would soon sweep across America. But acknowledging Elvis as a songwriter would have created a problem that Phillips wasn't prepared to handle. In 1954, the music publishing business was controlled by a small group of extremely powerful men who had built their fortunes by owning the rights to popular songs. These publishing executives had relationships with established songwriters, contracts with major labels, and agreements that ensured they would profit from every song that became a hit. An unknown teenager from Mississippi, who wrote his own material, threatened this entire system. If Elvis owned his own songs, he would control his own publishing rights. He would collect royalties not just as a performer, but as a creator. Most importantly, he wouldn't need them. So they made him an offer he was too young and too inexperienced to recognize as theft. "Kid," Phillips told Elvis after hearing his original compositions, "you've got real talent. But if you want to make it in this business, you need to work with professional songwriters. Leave the writing to the experts and focus on what you do best: performing." It sounded like good advice from a successful businessman to a naive young performer. It was actually the first step in a carefully orchestrated plan to separate Elvis from his creative output and ensure that other people would profit from his genius. The pattern was established immediately and would continue throughout Elvis's career. Elvis would create original melodies and lyrics, either alone or in collaboration with other musicians. These songs would then be professionally arranged by established songwriters who would receive full credit and all publishing rights. The official story would always be that Elvis was simply interpreting existing material. The reality was that he was being systematically robbed of his creative legacy. Take Hound Dog, one of Elvis's most famous recordings and a song universally credited to Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. The official narrative is that Elvis heard their song and decided to record his own version, transforming it from a blues number into a rock and roll anthem through his unique interpretive skills. The truth is far more complex and far more revealing. In 1956, Elvis was performing at a Las Vegas nightclub when he heard Freddie Bell and the Bellboys performing a comedic version of Hound Dog. The song had originally been written by Lieber and Stoller for blues singer Big Mama Thornton, but Bell's version was completely different, faster, more aggressive, with entirely new lyrics and a revolutionary rock rhythm that had never been recorded before. What the audience didn't know was that the new arrangement, the new lyrics, and the new musical approach had all been created in late-night jam sessions, where Elvis was the primary creative force. Bell and his musicians had developed their version by working with Elvis and incorporating his original ideas about how the song should sound. When Elvis recorded Hound Dog at RCA, he wasn't copying Bell's version. He was reclaiming his own creative contributions and adding even more original elements that would make the song a masterpiece. But Lieber and Stoller, as the credited writers of the original song, received full publishing rights to Elvis's transformative work. The revolutionary rock arrangement, the new vocal approach, the innovative guitar work, all of it was legally considered interpretation of their composition. Even though the recorded version shared almost no musical DNA with their original blues number, Elvis received no songwriting credit and no publishing royalties for creating what was essentially an entirely new song using only the title and basic concept of the original. This pattern would repeat itself dozens of times throughout Elvis's career. But nowhere was it more egregious than with the song that would become his signature. Love Me Tender. The official story of Love Me Tender is that it was adapted from a Civil War-era ballad called Ora Lee, with new lyrics written by Elvis's guitarist Scotty Moore and bass player Bill Black. Elvis, according to this version, simply sang the song as written. The reality is that Love Me Tender was almost entirely Elvis's creation, from the modified melody to the heartbreaking lyrics that would make it one of the most beloved songs in American popular music. The transformation began during a late-night recording session in 1956. Elvis had been experimenting with Ora Lee, trying to find a way to modernize the 19th century melody without losing its essential emotional power. He slowed down the tempo, changed several chord progressions, and began improvising new lyrics that captured a more contemporary and more personal form of romantic longing. The melody needed to breathe differently. Elvis later explained in a rare interview where he discussed his creative process. The old song was beautiful, but it felt like something from a museum. I wanted it to sound like something a young man would sing to someone he really loved. Over several hours, Elvis crafted new lyrics that maintained the sweetness of the original concept, while adding a vulnerability and directness that spoke to his generation. The famous opening lines, "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go," came from Elvis's own experience of young love and his deep understanding of what his audience was feeling. But when Love Me Tender was released, Elvis was credited only as a co-writer, sharing credit with Vera Mattson, a professional songwriter who had contributed minimal input to the finished product. More importantly, Elvis was forced to sign away his publishing rights to Hill and Range Songs, the publishing company that had exclusive agreements with his record label. The result was that Elvis received a small fraction of the royalties generated by his own creative work, while the lion's share went to music industry executives who had contributed nothing to the song's creation. Perhaps even more revealing is the story behind Don't Be Cruel, a song that perfectly encapsulated Elvis's musical philosophy and became one of his biggest hits. Officially, Don't Be Cruel was written by Otis Blackwell, a talented songwriter who had never met Elvis and had no knowledge of his musical style or personal preferences. The song supposedly arrived at RCA as a complete composition, with Elvis adding only his interpretive magic to transform it into a classic. The truth is that Don't Be Cruel began as a collaboration between Elvis and several musicians during jam sessions at Graceland. The basic concept came from Elvis's own experience with romantic relationships and his desire to create a song that was simultaneously tough and vulnerable, confident and pleading. Elvis had this idea about a song that would sound strong but not mean. Recall DJ Fontana, Elvis's drummer during this period. He wanted something that would show a guy standing up for himself without being cruel about it. That balance, that specific emotional tone, that was all Elvis. Working with other musicians, Elvis developed the melody, the rhythm, and the basic lyrical concept over several sessions. The song was essentially complete when Otis Blackwell was brought in to provide professional lyrics and formal structure. Blackwell's contribution was significant and shouldn't be minimized, but it was built entirely on the foundation that Elvis had created. The finished song's emotional core, its musical identity, and its revolutionary blend of confidence and vulnerability all came directly from Elvis's creative vision. Yet Blackwell received full songwriting credit and all publishing rights, while Elvis was once again relegated to the role of mere performer. This systematic erasure of Elvis's creative contributions wasn't accidental or incidental. It was a deliberate strategy employed by music industry executives who understood that controlling songwriting meant controlling profits. The publishing business in the 1950s generated far more money than performing or recording. A successful songwriter could earn royalties for decades from a single composition, while a performer typically earned money only from initial record sales and live performances. By convincing Elvis to focus exclusively on performing while others received credit for songwriting, the industry ensured that he would remain financially dependent on continued recording and touring, rather than building the kind of long-term wealth that comes from owning intellectual property. But the financial theft was only part of the damage. Perhaps more importantly, the industry's systematic denial of Elvis's songwriting abilities contributed to a cultural narrative that diminished his artistic legitimacy and relegated him to the category of talented entertainer rather than serious musician. Critics who might have recognized Elvis as a creative genius were instead told, repeatedly and from authoritative sources, that he was simply a charismatic performer who happened to choose excellent material. This narrative made it easier to dismiss his cultural impact and artistic innovations as accidents rather than achievements. The pattern continued even as Elvis became the biggest star in the world. Songs like All Shook Up, Jailhouse Rock, and Can't Help Falling in Love all contained significant creative contributions from Elvis that were never officially acknowledged. All Shook Up supposedly came from songwriter Otis Blackwell, who claimed he wrote it after someone suggested he write a song based on the phrase, all shook up. What Blackwell didn't mention was that the phrase, along with the basic musical concept, had come from Elvis during a conversation about creating a song that captured the physical sensation of falling in love. Jailhouse Rock was officially written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, but the song's distinctive rhythm, its playful wordplay, and its revolutionary blend of humor and rebellion all reflected creative ideas that Elvis had been developing in his live performances for years. Can't Help Falling in Love was adapted from a French melody, but the English lyrics and the arrangement that made it a masterpiece came from extensive collaboration between Elvis and other musicians, with Elvis contributing both specific lines and the overall emotional approach that made the song timeless. In each case, Elvis's creative contributions were substantial and essential, but they were never officially recognized because acknowledging them would have disrupted the financial arrangements that benefited everyone, except the man who was actually creating the music. The cover-up was so complete that even Elvis's own family and closest friends began to accept the narrative that he wasn't really a songwriter. In interviews throughout his career, Elvis would often downplay his creative abilities, describing himself as simply a performer who happened to be good at choosing songs. But occasionally, usually in unguarded moments with trusted friends, the truth would emerge. "People don't understand," Elvis told his cousin Billy Smith during a conversation that was recorded without Elvis's knowledge. "They think I just get up there and sing whatever someone hands me. But most of those songs, the way they sound, the way they feel, that comes from me. I don't just sing the words. I find the words. I find the feeling." Perhaps the most tragic example of Elvis's hidden songwriting genius involves the gospel music that was closest to his heart. Throughout his career, Elvis recorded dozens of gospel songs, many of which became definitive versions that influenced generations of singers. What few people knew was that Elvis had also written numerous original gospel compositions that were never recorded or published, because his management believed they wouldn't be commercially successful. These songs, preserved only in home recordings and the memories of musicians who worked with them, reveal a songwriter of extraordinary depth and spiritual insight. Elvis's original gospel music combined traditional religious themes with contemporary musical language, creating compositions that spoke to both his generation's spiritual searching and their musical innovations. He wrote these gospel songs that would just break your heart, remembered Charlie Hodge, who sang backup vocals for Elvis for many years. Songs about forgiveness, about finding your way home, about the struggle between what you want and what you know is right. They were beautiful, and they were completely his. But these songs were never developed professionally, because Elvis's handlers were focused exclusively on maintaining his commercial image rather than nurturing his artistic growth. The suppression of Elvis's songwriting abilities wasn't just about money or even about artistic credit. It was about control. As long as Elvis remained dependent on other people's songs, he remained dependent on other people's decisions about his career direction, his artistic development, and his creative identity. A songwriter has creative autonomy. Songwriter can choose to explore different musical styles, address different themes, and work with different collaborators. A songwriter controls his own artistic destiny. By keeping Elvis in the role of interpreter rather than creator, the industry maintained control over one of the most powerful artistic forces in American popular music. The evidence of Elvis's songwriting genius is hidden in plain sight throughout his catalog. Listen to the way he transforms supposedly existing songs, adding musical and lyrical elements that weren't in the original compositions. Notice how his versions often bear little resemblance to the official source material, despite sharing the same writing credits. Pay attention to the consistency of emotional themes and musical approaches across songs that were supposedly written by completely different people. Consider the impossibility of dozens of different songwriters, all happening to write material that perfectly matched Elvis's unique vocal style, musical preferences, and artistic vision. Most tellingly, observe how Elvis's interpretations of songs often contained innovative elements that appeared in popular music only after his versions were released, suggesting that he wasn't copying existing trends, but creating new ones. The man who was supposedly just a performer was actually setting the creative direction for an entire generation of musicians. In recent years, music historians and industry insiders have begun to acknowledge what many people close to Elvis knew all along: that he was one of the most important songwriters of his era, even though his contributions were systematically hidden from public view. Some artists have begun crediting Elvis as an influence on their own songwriting, recognizing innovations in melody, rhythm, and lyrical approach that first appeared in his recordings. Music publishers have quietly begun acknowledging his creative contributions in internal documents, even though public credits remain unchanged. But the damage to Elvis's artistic legacy has been largely done. Generations of music fans and critics grew up believing that Elvis was a talented performer, but not a creative artist. That he was culturally important, but not artistically serious. This narrative has prevented proper recognition of Elvis's true genius and has obscured one of the most remarkable creative achievements in American popular music, the development of a completely new musical language that bridged racial, regional, and generational divides while speaking to universal human experiences. Elvis Aaron Presley wasn't just the king of rock and roll. He was one of America's greatest songwriters, a creative genius whose contributions were stolen by an industry that valued profit over artistry and control over truth. The songs that made Elvis famous weren't just interpreted by him. They were, in many cases, created by him. The musical innovations that defined an era weren't just performed by Elvis. They were invented by him. The voice that changed the world wasn't just singing other people's words. It was singing his own words, expressing his own musical vision, and sharing his own creative soul with anyone willing to listen. They tried to hide the songwriter behind the performer, the creator behind the interpreter, the artist behind the entertainer. But great art has a way of revealing the truth, regardless of what the credits say. Every time you hear "Love Me Tender" or "Don't Be Cruel" or "All Shook Up," you're not just hearing Elvis Presley, the performer. You're hearing Elvis Presley, the songwriter, the creative genius they tried to erase, the artistic force they couldn't quite contain. The king didn't just wear the crown. He forged it himself, one song at a time, one lyric at a time, one melody at a time. And no amount of cover-up can change that truth.